How are the dorsal and ventral pancreatic buds positioned? Dorsal, superior, ventral, or inferior? Dorsal. The dorsal bud forms the body, tail, and part of the head of the pancreas, while the ventral bud forms the uncinate process and remaining head. What is the position of the hepatic diverticulum relative to the foregut? Lateral, ventral, dorsal, or medial? Ventral. It grows ventrally into the septum transversum, giving rise to the liver, gallbladder, and bile ducts. How is the thyroglossal duct positioned during development? Midline, anterior, lateral, or posterior? Midline. This midline epithelial tract marks the descent path of the thyroid gland from the tongue to the neck. Its remnants can form thyroglossal duct cysts. What is the relationship between the frontonasal and maxillary processes? Inferior, superficial, lateral, or superior? Superior. The frontonasal process gives rise to the forehead and nasal structures. The maxillary processes grow medially to fuse with it, forming the cheeks and lateral upper lip. So it is superior but also medial. What is the position of the stomodium relative to the buccopharyngeal membrane? Inferior, anterior, posterior, or superior? Anterior. The stomodium is the external primitive mouth pit. The buccopharyngeal membrane is the internal temporary barrier. Its rupture connects the mouth to the foregut. How is the notochord positioned relative to the neural tube? Anterior, ventral, posterior, or dorsal? Ventral. The notochord lies ventrally and induces the formation of the overlying neural tube. Its remnants become the nucleus pulposus of intervertebral discs. What is the relationship between the alar and basal plates? Lateral, ventral, dorsal, or medial? Dorsal. Alar plates are dorsal to basal plates in the developing neural tube. The alar plates form sensory regions, while the basal plates form motor regions, establishing the fundamental dorsal sensory and ventral motor organization of the spinal cord and brainstem. What is the position of the dermatome relative to the myotome? Dorsolateral, ventromedial, anterior, or posterior? Dorsolateral. Dermatome cells migrate to form the dermis. Myotome cells form skeletal muscle, separating skin and muscle innervation patterns. At the time of its initial specification within the somite, how is the sclerotome positioned relative to the notochord? Medial, lateral, ventral, or dorsal? Lateral. The sclerotome originates from the ventromedial part of the somite, which is positioned lateral to the notochord. Its cells then undergo a ventromedial migration to surround the notochord, ultimately contributing to the ventral parts of the vertebral column. What is the relationship between the primitive streak and Henson's node? Inferior, posterior, superior, or anterior? Posterior. The primitive streak extends posteriorly from Henson's node, which is the organizing center at the anterior end of the streak. Which germ layer occupies the middle position? Ectoderm, mesoderm, endoderm, or archenteron? Mesoderm. During gastrulation, the embryo forms 3 germ layers. The ectoderm is the outer layer, becoming the skin and nervous system. The mesoderm is the middle layer, becoming muscle, bone, heart, and kidneys. The endoderm is the inner layer, becoming the gut, lungs, and liver. What is the position of the neural crest cells relative to the neural tube? Dorsal, ventral, lateral, or medial? Lateral. Neural crest cells originate at the dorsal neural tube crest, then migrate laterally to form diverse structures like ganglia, melanocytes, and connective tissue. How is the pharyngeal apparatus positioned in the developing head? Posterior, lateral, medial, or anterior? Lateral. The pharyngeal apparatus, consisting of arches, pouches, and clefts, forms in the lateral aspect of the embryonic head and neck region. How are the superior and inferior parathyroid glands positioned? Inferior, superior, medial, or lateral? Superior. Superior parathyroids develop from the 4th pharyngeal pouch, while inferior parathyroids develop from the 3rd pouch, leading to their final superior/inferior positions. What is the position of the ultimobranchial body relative to the thyroid? Inferior, medial, lateral, or superior? Inferior. The ultimobranchial body migrates inferiorly to be incorporated into the thyroid, giving rise to parafollicular cells. What is the relationship between the mesonephros and metanephros? Caudal, cranial, anterior or posterior? Cranial. The mesonephros functions temporarily and lies cranial to the metanephros, which develops in the sacral region. How are the pronephros, mesonephros, and metanephros positioned sequentially? Cranial to caudal, posterior to anterior, caudal to cranial, or anterior to posterior? Cranial to caudal. Pronephros, mesonephros, and metanephros develop sequentially in a cranial to caudal direction. What is the relationship between the Müllerian and Wolffian ducts? Medial, lateral, crossing, or parallel? Parallel. Müllerian ducts and Wolffian ducts initially develop parallel to each other before one regresses depending on sex hormones. How are the genital tubercle and labioscrotal swellings positioned? Posterior, superior, inferior, or anterior? Anterior. The genital tubercle forms the clitoris or penis. The labioscrotal swellings form the labia majora or scrotum and are positioned posterior to the tubercle. What is the position of the Rathke's pouch relative to the infundibulum? Superior, inferior, anterior, or posterior? Anterior. Rathke's pouch grows upward toward the infundibulum. Its anterior wall becomes the adenohypophysis. How is the adenohypophysis positioned relative to the neurohypophysis? Anterior, superior, inferior, or posterior? Anterior. The adenohypophysis develops from Rathke's pouch and lies anterior to the neurohypophysis, which is a downgrowth from the brain. What is the relationship between the telencephalon and diencephalon? Anterior, posterior, inferior, or superior? Anterior. The telencephalon expands anteriorly and laterally from the more central diencephalon. How are the basal ganglia positioned relative to the thalamus? Medial, posterior, lateral, or anterior? Lateral. The basal ganglia are lateral to the thalamus, separated by the internal capsule. What is the position of the internal capsule relative to the basal ganglia and thalamus? Between, adjacent, within, or around? Between. The internal capsule is a white matter tract that passes between the basal ganglia and the thalamus, carrying fibers to and from the cortex. How was the corona radiata positioned relative to the internal capsule? Lateral, inferior, superior, or medial? Superior. The corona radiata is the superior, fan-shaped radiation of projection fibers that spread out to the cerebral cortex.